from our collaborative partner Demos. And today, so our kickoff will very much focus on the societal dimension. And we do realize that the strategy is also much more than only that component. So in particular, I wish our guests from outside the university welcome, from Utrecht, from Glasgow, and from the neighboring University of Turku. And I hope that we have a lively discussion and meeting. And now I will give the word to Mikael Sokero, who has promised to keep us active and take care of the agenda. So Mikael, and very welcome all, and let's have fun.
Thank you, Rector Hupa. I would like to start with a better welcome. So once again. Great, thank you. This feels a lot better. Great 2 hours ahead of us. My name is Mikael Sokero. I come from think tank Demos Helsinki, and I'm mainly here because we've been working now intensively for the last year, so 2018, and also a bit in the 2017 with Åbo Academy for creating something of a guideline, understanding for the background of this very important year, the strategy process in 2019. So warmly welcome here in Turku, and besides all of you who are present, warm welcome online, our friends in Vaasa and other cities in Finland and abroad. Today you will have also the opportunity to take part in the discussion online, so using the hashtag OR2030. And I really strongly hope that all of you here as well continue the discussion in the digital dimension, also remembering that the physical presence is the most important. So combining these two worlds is not easy. Right. Today, before we start with a keynote speech and then we go to the panel, I was thinking of presenting you something that we did last year. So for the next 10-15 minutes, I will just go briefly through a document, which is a guidelines for impact document, which you can find also online. We haven't printed them here, but you will be able to find them online and go through this paper, and there's also a more elaborate one that is for internal use as well. After this, I will call on stage our keynote speaker from Utrecht University, and then a panel discussion will follow with super interesting people from Finland and abroad. And I really strongly hope that it's going to be an interactive discussion. This means not only using the hashtag, but also you taking part to the discussion. I have prepared some questions. Don't worry about that, but I strongly hope that you will also participate in this discussion. And for those means, we have a device called Catchbox. It's here, and I want you to always use this because of the online videotape that is going on at the same time. So 3:30, I think we will try to wrap up. Before that, we will have Elina Pirataniemi for closing remarks, and then there's going to be coffee at 3:30 outside, and then at 4 o'clock this event will be ended. Right. Very good. That's it. Let's go to the PDF. Okay, so this is how it looks, and now I know this is a lot of stuff. There's a lot of slides here, and I just want to briefly go through them. This is more of a, you could think about this as a teaser, kind of a big a big picture of what we did last year, and I suggest that then you go more deeply into it after this, and you can find it online, and now I don't remember where, but I will tell you in the end of this session where it is. So what we tried to do here is most of all understand the operational context of universities. And this means the changing landscapes, changing world outside the universities, those big processes that are going on, and ask that what kind of key questions these changes pose for universities now and in the future, in 10, 15 years. So we try to look at the outside world mainly, and then kind of pose key questions for Åbo Academy, also guiding and provoking thinking in the strategy process. And as you, at least all of you who are following the Finnish discussion in science policy and universities, there has been actually a lot of discussion in terms of universities and especially the funding framework. And this is exceptional in Finland, I would say, and it has also created opportunities for science policy and research and university education issues having a more prominent role in the upcoming election discussion and debates. But what we also can see is that these are mainly the discussion that is going on around the universities is mostly related to technical things, framework of funding, well, how many percents should education and how much should internationalization be funded, and what's the proportion, etc. What we try to do here is to look more the mission, the purpose of universities. So what are universities for in a changing world? And this also brings us to the question of impact, of course. What could impact in a changing world be? As I said, we already started last year, early last year, so 2018. And then we were working on this background study and the operational context side. And then in the end of last year, then in autumn, we were actually in contact with a lot of you, the members of the Åbo Academy bigger community, and had discussions and workshops and tried to figure out ways of how to deal with changing world and be impactful, be prosperous also in the future. These were then synthesized to be something we call pathways to impact, which you can find in the end of this paper. But this is something, the question of impact is highly debated question in the university context, and it's not a very easy question. It's a complex one, and today we will hear a lot more about it, and you will have a possibility to discuss it. But in this paper, we've adopted this view that mainly at the moment we have this kind of a paradigm that the impact of universities is measured by quantitative indicators related to, for example, publications and degrees, patents and companies. So universities do what they do. They educate, they facilitate research, then something comes out, and that's what we call impact. And another way to look at it is that this is something, these indicators are performance indicators. They are outputs of universities and their operations. And impact is something that actually follows after outputs have translated into outcomes, societal outcomes, and then the world changes, and that's what we call impact. A way to look at it is the concept of productive interactions, so interacting with the society and facilitating collaboration in education and research, both. Today we will hear in the keynote speech a lot more about this. I will stop here for a moment in the thesis for the future of academia, and these are something that affect, of course, Åbo Academy, but more widely also the other universities and higher education institutions in Finland and in Europe. Certainly there is now a strong pressure for universities to show and enhance the societal impact. This is something that must be taken into account when you're doing strategy, of course. Being proactive and defining from your own perspective as a university what this impact is something of a hard task, but also something that we strongly encourage. At the same time, academic professions are changing, and this is connected, of course, also to the changing landscapes in work. At the same time, being a professor, being an academician is in strong change. And also academic careers are changing. One thing that also is connected to this is this pressure and ideal towards more interaction, communication, project management. The question is that what does this do to academia? What does this do to universities, and how is this a question in strategy? One thing that is also discussed is the autonomy and academic freedom. This is, of course, a big question, and I've also heard many people saying that the universities have never been actually free. They have always been kind of defined and under societal pressure. So how do we actually nurture academic freedom and autonomy in the future, especially in contexts where you have stronger steering from the ministry, you have stronger strategic focus areas? It's a big question. The question of lifelong learning now, for you who have been following the discussions related to the new funding framework that comes into power in a couple of years, the lifelong learning will be more strongly emphasized in the new framework. But at the same time, it's connected to this linear thinking in the context of the productive interactions. Namely because for some reason it seems so that we have this kind of implicit thinking that when you're young, then we invest in you with studying, and then you're loaded with learning, then you go to work and then apply that working. But then as the world and the nature of work is changing, some occupations are disappearing and new ones are appearing. This model is not something of a sustainable one. Universities, Åbo Academy University is a fine example of an institution that should take a strong role in lifelong learning, since there is already structural structures for it in the Center for Lifelong Learning, for example. Open science is a lot of things at the moment in the European Union science policy. It's a big thing also in Finland. The vision for 2030 for higher education 2030 by the ministry says that open science is the main way to create impact in science and in Finland. At the same also you can see a lot of questions related to the public funding of universities and the funding portfolio, and this is something that must be taken into account. Some would say that the public funding eventually will decrease in the same pace with private money and other kind of money increasing. This is a big question, of course. And then finally, the geographical context and meaningfulness in geographical context is something that must be taken into account in the future. And by this I mean that Finnish universities and universities in Finland, higher education institutions, have been Finnish universities in Finland. But now at the moment, the strong pressures for internationalization and the continuation of the European project and its future shows that maybe this geographical understanding and kind of the physical situation of universities must be revisited. At the same time, digitalization creates and enables a new kind of spaces to be opened up for universities. I think these theses are somewhat a big picture, big questions for universities and impact and societal interaction and the future of universities. And from here onwards, I would like to elaborate the discussion first with the keynote speaker and then with the panel. But this is to kind of paint the big picture of what these impact questions might be about and how are they connected to the future of universities and the academia. Now maybe in this moment, if there's something you would like to ask or comment, this would be a great chance for it. All right. Okay. Very good. Can I have the next presentation, please? Okay. To elaborate on these thoughts and go deeper into something we call productive interactions, I would like to call on stage someone who I admire strongly. He's been the chair of the board of the Dutch National Endowment for Humanities in Hague and representative of the Netherlands in the Standing Committee for Humanities of the European Science Foundations from 1996 to 2003. He's also the former director of research at the Royal Academy of Sciences in the Netherlands, and currently he is the vice rector for research and director of the Center for Humanities in Utrecht University. William van den Akker. Welcome.
Thank you. Am I on? Can you hear me? Okay. Thanks for the invitation, first of all. Very much appreciated. I'm used to walking around, but after 3 back surgeries in 3 years at the same spot, I'm not able to do that anymore. I thought the previous slide, if you could, no, you can't, with the umbrella, I thought that was for me. You know, coming from the Netherlands with the umbrella in the back, looking at Finland. Much of what I'm going to say has already been said, in fact, by you, by your paper, because you interviewed me in Utrecht and stole all my ideas, put it in your paper with some references, and then pretend it's your work. That's how we proceed in academia. So a lot of what I'm going to say to you is superfluous, I think, but I'm going to say it anyway. But I'm going to try to, in the end, try to be critical about the report, just to stir it up, try to get some real discussion going. First of all, you see this picture. It's a snake biting itself in its tail. In the 19th century, the famous molecular chemist Kekulé, one evening he was staring in his fire, and he saw in the flames a snake biting itself in its tail. And all of a sudden we realized this is how benzene is molecularly structured. And it was true. This is what we call serendipity. This is what we all know. All of a sudden you find something that you were looking for a long time in a totally unexpected moment. One of our Dutch Nobel Prize winners was asked, when did you do your big discovery? He said, when I was rummaging through in the house, in the attic, all of a sudden I realized the solution. But you have to be looking for the problem. That's the big difference. Now suppose, I'm from literary studies originally. Suppose I'm staring in the flames of a fire and I see a snake biting itself in its tail, which is possible. It's highly improbable that I would think, hey, I just discovered the molecular structure of benzene. So as Paul Valéry, the French poet and thinker, said, every day 10,000 of the most brilliant ideas come up in the wrong heads. But I think it's a basic element of what we do, of what research is. It's a basic element of creativity anyway. The sudden moment you think, I was looking for B, but I'm finding C. And it's far more interesting. But I did not fill it in my grant. That's one of our modern problems, I think. These are just some notes that you just realize immediately. Academic research is a necessary part of a vital knowledge society. It's driven by curiosity. And it should stay driven by curiosity. It has to have a moment of risk and repeated failure, and that's what I miss nowadays. Filling in all those forms for the ERC or Horizon 2020, there's no element of risk. In fact, you have to know the outcome of your research beforehand. That's silly. You should answer, I don't know what will be the outcome. I really don't know. That's research. So unpredictability, called serendipity. The time span can be short, can be long. But now you have to fill in, it's going to take me 4 years. And then I will come up with a solution. Nobody will ask you afterwards, and did you come up with a solution when it's a payback time? Are you going to pay back the grant if you didn't find a solution? That's another question. I think research conceptually is identical for all disciplines. Don't make any mistake. I don't believe in the difference between, let's say, medical studies or biology or humanities and social sciences. All those squeaking about, social science and humanities, we're different, we're different, we're different. We're not different. Basically, in doing research and teaching, you're not different. You use different methods, you use different books, you use different equipment, but basically, you're not different. Maybe technical sciences are somewhat different. Maybe. And it ranges from applied sciences to fundamental research. And I just dislike the dichotomy between, this is fundamental research and this is applied research. I think it's a whole range. If you look into research itself, and look back into the process of research, you will find moments of applied research, moments of fundamental research, moments of, I'll come back to that later on again. Now, some key concepts of the paper that was published in 2017, and please make a reference to the Leroux paper that Jack Spapen and I wrote. It's called Productive Interactions. It's not that important. We, as universities, live and work in a complex environment. We have, on the one hand, have to deal with our national policies. On the other hand, we have to deal with international policies. Those two cannot be identical and are not identical in many cases. We have to deal with international competition between rankings. However, we want to get rid of it. Who is going to start? Is your university going to start with say, no, rankings are not for us. We don't do it anymore. Everywhere where I speak, everybody says, no, we don't want rankings because they're not true, and they always choose a ranking that suits them, but nobody stops. It's a kind of system that keeps itself rolling. But we do it. It's not given by some higher authority rankings. Shanghai ranking is not given by, it's not one of the items on Moses' stones. There's a relationship between research and education, and if we talk about impact, a lot of universities forget that the first and main impact factor that we have is education, teaching the next generation. That's our most important impact. But people tend to forget. And I'll later come back to that and make some more provocative remarks, because I think that we ourselves are, no, let's put it mildly now, and let's put it bluntly later, we are to blame ourselves. That teaching is not number one in our thinking about impact, about what we do for society. There's societal demand, of course, getting more pressure and pressure, national and on a local level. And if I look, and I looked into all of the strategical plans of important European universities and American universities, they all have impact in there. All of a sudden, impact is the catchword. As was, what was the valorization? Do you remember that word? Oh, horrible, horrible. And then, but now impact is facing maybe the same fate. I don't know. But as long as we try to keep understanding about what we mean by it, and what we not mean by it. But don't be mistaken. I am absolutely sure that if we are not taking this seriously, people in politics will. They are already busy. And if we are not taking the lead, we're going to lose the lead. Maybe we are losing the lead as universities. Maybe politicians take the lead already. And that has to do with a short time span in which they're thinking. They're thinking about their election time. In the Netherlands, it's 4 years. I don't know how it's in Finland. Also 4 years. They don't want to seed something that their successor from another party is going to harvest. And we have to keep that in mind. But we're slow. As universities, we're very conservative. Very, very conservative. Paradoxically, it's also our strong point. If you look at there are only two institutions surviving the Middle Ages: churches and universities. Now, we all know how churches are doing. We are doing better. But that's the paradox, because we're conservative on the one hand and progressive on the other hand. But now we are much more in the pressure cooker to be less conservative, to act, to really show that we matter, that society needs us, because the trust in university, in knowledge, is diminishing. Not that I'm a doom thinker, absolutely not, and it's not diminishing that rapidly, but it is diminishing. Research is a necessary part of the game, but now we're operating, as I said, at the crossroads of excellence in academic competition on the one hand, and we cannot lose that. On the other hand, we have to be relevant for society. And if you look at the societal demands, the societal challenges, I just wrote some down from the grand societal challenges and the sustainable development goals. My God, look at them. Look at what we have to account for doing our research. No poverty, affordable and clean energy, zero hunger, good health and well-being. You name it. Are we doing that? Are we all, when we are formulating our research project, thinking, hey, let's look at the sustainable development goals? Is my project really part of that? Is that solving one of these internationally, globally formulated problems? I'm not sure. As already has been said, and it's in your paper, and I think that's good that you mention it. We have to get rid of the linear way of thinking about research. That, especially in the natural sciences, you hear this concept of we are the starting point. If you give us enough money, and they're always complaining that we have the ATM machine and they don't have the code. So they want the ATM machine and the code and the pass so they can help themselves as far as money goes. They start research, fundamental research, and then gradually, slowly but gradually, it goes to society. But that's not how research goes. And they know it, and we all know it. It's a dynamic process. It goes back and forth. Just one example. If you look at the relation between lung cancer and smoking, it took us 60 years of dynamic research, not linear. It did not start, the problem did not start with research in academia. It started with general practitioners. They saw a connection between smoking and lung cancer. They saw their patients. And they started the process. And then academia took over. And then the results were negative. And then they went back, etc., etc. And if you look at the impact, economic impact, what did governments do with it? They lose a lot of tax money. If you're going to think it. It took us 60 years before governments decided to ban smoking. Or at least to make it that expensive, that etc., etc. But still, there is. So this isn't just an example how research really is a dynamic process and not a static process. This is another example of nanotechnology. Within our paper, you can see how complex and back and forth research goes from companies to spin-offs to research to academic research again, doing fundamental, doing applied research when necessary, and then going back to company X who comes in and company Y who withdraws, etc. That's how it goes. Or you can see it as a honey rate. Now, the productive interactions, as you already mentioned, it's when it leads to efforts by stakeholders to apply research to societal goals. Can be direct, can be between people, can be indirect via media, can be material, financial, or other forms of support. Now, my main point is this. Productive interactions is closely connected to the dynamic process of research, which is to say that right from the start of the project, people in academia have to try to get their stakeholders around the table as soon as possible. Right from the start. Don't wait until the project is finished and then look for stakeholders. Get them in as soon as you have an idea. What you will see is that, first of all, some stakeholders will back off. Some new stakeholders will come in. But they will change the way you think. They will change the way you will go forward after 2 or 3 years, or 4 years maybe. But what they will not do, and I'm stressing this because all of the time the criticism I get is, now we have lost our autonomy. We will not lose our autonomy. We're still there. We're ahead of the table. And the stakeholders can say what they want, but we can do research as we think we have to do it. There is no way of dichotomy between autonomy on the one hand and productive interaction on the other hand. Productive interaction encompasses all kinds of impact. And impact not defined as knowledge dissemination, because that's what we were talking about 10 years ago. How can we disseminate our knowledge to society as much as we can? So we praise the ones who were on television, and we praise the ones who were on the radio, and we praise the ones who wrote articles in newspapers, etc. But that is, it's fine and it's necessary, but it's not the point. The main point is get society in academia as soon as you can. That's my main point. That's productive interaction. And this is a picture, almost unreadable, from the Leary paper. Comprehensive assessment means that we have to focus more than on more than scientific quantity. We have to focus more on scientific quality. We have to include methods to evaluate societal impact. But how do we do that? It's a hard nut to crack. Involve stakeholders, preferably in design, which I told you before, but also in the assessment process. And address wider interests and try to innovate, please. Now, this is my last, no. The role of universities in the research ecosystem, engagement of stakeholders, productive in their pathways to impacts. Okay, this is my last slide. Yes, the penultimate slide. Now I'm trying to catch up with pathways to impact. And that's where I'm going to criticize the report. And I'm trying to be polite, but on the other hand, I'm trying to be short. And those two do not always match. I think the report does not underline enough the internal change that our universities need. Our system is not fit for really to have societal impact. We still hold on to the old methods. And some faculties are other than others, but if you look at the natural sciences, the H-index still is highly important. And even if we agree that teaching is our impact factor number 1, the professors are not assessed by that teaching. Moreover, some say, I don't teach because I'm in the natural sciences and I am a researcher. So how can you let me teach? And if we don't change that system and the reward system that comes with it, we will not come far. And I think this is not, this should be underlined much more. How do we do it? How can we change our internal system? And I don't have the answer. But I'm absolutely sure that we have to. We have to do something about it. If not, especially the younger scholars, will run away from academia. And it's happening already. Don't count on my age. I'm 64. I'm lost. I'm a lost generation. If you ask 64 old professors, would you like to change? You know the answer. Oh, yes, please, change. We were just discussing this over lunch, and I thought there must be a genetical, I'm not a geneticist and not in genetics, but there must be some gene that maybe maybe in 20 or 30 years, parents can say, hey, this newborn son or daughter is going to be an academic. It's complaining always crying, never having enough, so there must be something. And then later on, you can be sure if the boy or the son or the daughter will say, well, 20 years ago it was much better. Then you know for sure. So let's focus on the younger generation, because they're lost. And sometimes they're suppressed in many countries, suppressed by the older professors who say, no, I'm sorry, but you have to look at the age index. And I'm a co-author of this paper. Even though I did not write a word of this paper, I didn't even read it, by the way, but I'm a co-author. And it's going to hide my age index. If we don't do anything about this problem, and I'll stop here, then nothing's going to change. But my fear is, and this is my real fear, then society and then the government will take over. And then they will predict, they will just announce universities what they have to do and what they can't do anymore. And I think it's 12 o'clock in that sense. And if we don't take the lead and show society and politicians that we really are trying, that we really are changing the whole system, we're going to lose the battle. I'm a very optimistic guy from nature, and I still am. I'm 64, as I just told you. I will not see the results, I think. Maybe as a very old man. Oh, the impact. Great. But my message is very serious in that respect. Now, if somebody of you today sees a snake biting itself in its tail, I would go to a doctor, I think. Thank you.
No question. Excellent. Thank you so much, William. I think this has provoked some thinking and ideas and questions and even criticism. I would now like to open the floor for discussion. Who's like to go next?
It happens all the time. It happens all the time. And let me tell you just one anecdote. One of my friends who's a professor in Chinese, he gave a lecture, and then afterwards, it was a general lecture, and afterwards about Chinese literature, and are there any questions? But it was total silence. And then a man stood up and said, well, Professor, thank you very much. That was a very interesting lecture, but there's still one question I did not get an answer on. If Chinese talk to themselves, to each other, do they understand each other, or do they merely utter sounds?
Yes. Wait a minute. We start here and then we go to you. Please, Thomas Wilhelmsson.
Okay, thanks. This was a very inspiring lecture, as we could expect, and I think we all can agree that the greatest impact universities do have is through education. Of course, we shouldn't forget the research, but I very much agree with you that we often forget the educational side. And that was, I think, one of your basic messages, that we should understand that better. But I think this was an interesting lecture today. First time, I think in ages, I heard a lecture about the future, not mentioning digitalization and globalization. So just to disappoint you in this sense, I would like to ask, you are emphasizing education, but the educational role of universities, I think, is dramatically changing as well. That I mean, for 5 years ago or a little more, we were all sure that the MOOCs will kill all universities in a few years. No. And you had people in the US, I remember 5 years ago somebody writing an article that in 5 years half of the American universities will be bankrupt. And you have lots of these. And of course, this has not really happened. But still, the marketplace for education has undergone tremendous changes. People go around the world in very different ways, take things through digital channels and so on. And I think in a few years, when the youngsters come, which are used to not asking another person if he has a problem, but asking the tablet, we will see quite dramatic changes of university education, both nationally, internationally. And I wonder if you have any comments how we should, because that really has an impact. Yeah. Do you have any comment on this part?
Yeah. First of all these changes that have been predicted in the past, I remember someone predicted that we should all, as quickly as possible, learn Chinese. That was 20 years ago. But still, it's not really necessary. And here's another point of criticism to the report, maybe. I think in the future, universities will differ more. And that's often forgotten. Universities look alike. If I may be cutting it short, and I'm not trying to be rude, but a lot of phrases in the report could be made for other universities too. We're excellent in this, we're excellent in that, and we're up to date to this, and we're up to... The point it maybe is, and especially in teaching, is what are we going to differentiate in types of universities? Are there going to be, let's say, on the one hand, universities that are based mostly on MOOCs, like open university kind of types, and at the same time, will there be universities for a very exclusive number of students who have a one-to-one teaching, more like the Oxford or Cambridge model? I don't believe there's going to be one model for the university. But as long as we keep saying to ourselves, our university is a comprehensive university and should be doing excellent in all the rankings, we should ask ourselves the question, what kind of university do we want to be? For what kind of students? And go from there, take it from there. Not wait until technology changes something, but use technology for your purpose. The first thing is to define, as I said before, what kind of university do you want to be? Do you want to be the same as Helsinki, the same as Utrecht, the same as Groningen? I'm raised in a system where all universities were the same. It didn't matter if you studied law in Leiden or in Groningen or in in Utrecht. It didn't matter. No employee would ask for it if you studied in Groningen or Utrecht. But that's changing. So that is not a concrete answer, because I cannot predict, especially not the future. This is a quote from Yogi Bear, I think. But I think the question should be rephrased.
Excellent. Thank you. Before I let the next question go, now there's been reference to two different reports or papers. One is the one that William and his colleague Jack Spapen wrote. So that's written for the League of European Research Universities, LERU, so that you can find online. Just productive interactions and something is the headline, yeah? Second one is the paper that I was presenting in the beginning, or just the first couple of slides of it, and this is what William is also referencing to as well. And that you can find in abo.fi/AA2030, so AA2030.
And I can add an interesting publication from the, I think it was the Rathenau Institute, who published a paper some years ago, 3 years ago maybe, called 4 Scenarios for the Future Universities. And they worked out 4 scenarios. Suppose that suppose Europe is going to fall apart. What does that mean for education, for research? It's a very interesting paper concerning writing scenarios and reading about it and discussing about it. So I'll give you the reference, and the reference is in the paper, by the way.
It's in the paper, and both of these papers, actually.
Yes.
Excellent. So, moving forward, please present yourself and the question or the comment.
Niklas Nordling. First of all, let me thank you. I found it really intriguing what you said. Interesting, challenging. And I would say that I echoed and it resonated what you said. I had a bit of a trouble understanding the difference between educating, learning, and productive interactions. Aren't they the same thing? I mean, any transition of knowledge to someone is a productive interaction. But that's just an observation. And something I would like to ask you about, of how do you take the lead? What is your guidance, advice for universities to take the lead, not to be victims of political lead?
How do you take the lead in this process of productive interactions, you mean? I'm not I will not say bottom up, and I will not say top down. My answer, after 40 years being in academia, my answer would be, please try to do both. Set examples. This is just one practical example. If you, as a university, if you think this through and ask your academic community, would you come up with projects that have to be interdisciplinary, that has to have a proven amount of non-academic stakeholders, etc., at 2 pages, and then make it a kind of competitive element building in there? I think that helps. We did that in Utrecht in 2000. And we got about 120 applications, and only 15 were rewarded. But the others most of them went through. And they went on. And that attracts other people who formerly did not believe in the whole I concept. So it will take time. It will take really time, and you have to take time for that. But the Helsinki challenge, where I was last year, I think it was, or in 2017, I'm not sure, was a great example of that. It was an example of a competitive element where all the participants gained much more money, even if they were not the prize winners, even if they were just the nominees, as I've been told later. This is an example, and it attracts other people. It attracts younger groups who say, hey, I want this too. And there's always a group of 64 and older who say, leave me alone, give me the money, and let me complain for the rest of my time. Leave them alone.
Great. So Viljan was talking about Helsinki Challenge, which was a science-based idea competition organized first by the University of Helsinki in 2015 and then the second time in 2017 by 10 universities, also Åbo Akademi University, which was an idea competition where science-based teams were co-creating solutions to sustainable development goals. That's actually the first time we've met with Viljan in Brussels, when you were also talking about the very same topics that we've been talking today and will talk. Great, moving forward.
Good, thanks. I'm Fritjof Salström, we met at lunch. Thanks for an interesting talk. I'll go straight to my question. If you could go back a few slides to the one nanotechnology development slide.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to ask you about, you arrive in education, but I'm not sure whether I remember this correctly, but in that slide and in your thinking about product development and impact, there was not a lot of education and the teaching of
no. This was a project.
So, yeah.
I'm sorry. This was a project.
So that's let me just finish. So that's what I'm asking about. Do you know of any work that in terms like these also addresses and has and sort of scientifically based understanding of what the role is for the teaching of these men and women in the research groups? Because taking your model sort of seriously, that would also imply that if we are to understand the process that this graph here describes, then we also would need to add the teaching that is being done in the same time by these academics. So that's what I'm asking about. Where is the teaching here, and why isn't it there?
Yeah, my answer is very disappointing, I think, for you, because first of all, the paper was about research, and that was what we were supposed to write about. And the second thing is, it was taken from the Siampi project, which was only about research. So if you would like to have an example, which would be better, where the teaching also would be in there, I would have to go home and think about a new project, but I have to do a lot of research in hindsight how the process was done. And this is a picture of, let's say, quote, the reality of how it was done.
But if you want to change the reality, then we need to bring teaching into these pictures.
Yes.
That's how I hear you arguing. I think that's a great argument, but there's not a lot of work, I think, supporting yet that kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah, in this case, you're right. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Moving forward, please.
Ibrahim Özdemir. Thank you very much. I think there was something missing about the privatization of higher education. There are many private universities, some they call corporate universities. They are little bit their focus, their scenarios different from public universities. So how do you place private universities in your argument? Thank you very much.
I think that would fit into my answer to one of your predecessors, and that is thinking about the types of universities that we will have. So there are already private universities, and but I'm talking about now about public universities, where the public can say, this is our tax money, and you are spending it. So how do you account for your spending? In private universities, the situation is, of course, different, like in private companies. So I'm really curious about what private universities will going to do about open access. Are they going to follow us and the governments who say, well, it's taxpayers' money, and they can say, well, it's not taxpayers' money, it's private money. And what are the consequences of that? But that has to do with the scenarios you write. What would you like to be a private university, and what are the advantages of being a private university, or would you stay away from being a private university? So I don't have the answer to a private university, but I think a private university will my guess is that a private university will endorse the idea of productive interactions much more than the public universities, because they do it already. They have the stakeholders already in their boards, and because there's money involved, and sometimes it's big money. But then, on the other hand, sometimes autonomy of research is endangered. So it's going to be a balance between the two. Yeah.
It's actually also a question that we can continue in the panel in some sense when we elaborate the discussion from also Finland. But let's have a couple of more questions and comments, starting from here, please.
Okay, Malin Brenbach. Hello. We go back to that picture that Fritjof was talking about. And you were saying you know where the teaching comes in. There's rather recent studies done actually by Financial Times, where they look at the most successful business schools. And they have concluded that the most successful have 70% of their faculty is actually from our external, who are not within the research, which means that you have the internal ones are doing the excellent research, I guess. Some of them are good teachers too, they have to. But then you amplify the teaching by bringing in the reality. It would be very interesting for me to at least get some idea of how in the world we are going to do that, because the way the Finnish university system is constructed is that fundamentally we require anybody who's hired as a university teacher to have a PhD degree, and we do not really bring in a lot of, well, we have them as guest lecturers, but we don't really involve them in, you know, taking command of an entire course or half a curricula. We're really, or even planning curricula. Is that what you are, I mean, they could be involved in that if we want to bring in the stakeholders?
No. I think we, as a public university, I'm talking about a public university, we are responsible for our teaching and the quality of our teaching. So that means that every teacher has to be qualified according to our terms. So he or she has to have a PhD, for instance. That does not mean that the outside world could be left out during the whole course. I'm urging, when I was a dean of humanities, I urged my professors and the assistants and the associates and the full professors to have at least one, let's say, alumni or external man or woman take over 1 hour of the whole course to talk about what he or she did with her or his study. And that would be a major improvement, but we don't do that. But that would be a major improvement. And they're lining up from the outside world. They would love it. They don't even need the bottle of wine. So you can fit them in, but please don't give them the responsibility. No, I would be I would be very negative about it.
And then also here's the question that you were bringing up about the design. Then this, I think, applies to education and teaching as well. So then you can, for example, in the University of Helsinki, there's been good examples of these project courses where geography students have been, or geography courses have been co-created together with local regional NGOs in order to understand that what is actually, what could be taught and what are the methods and how can you actually bring about a course which is not very traditional one. I have one there and one there, starting from here.
But my back is failing me now, so I have to sit down. I'm very sorry.
Thanks very much for the discussion so far, for the keynote and for all the comments. I'm a research student in the humanities and literature, and so I'm very interested, because of your background in the humanities, about your thoughts on the future of kind of more traditional or philological research, especially with in relation to questions of societal impact, where these traditional or more philological disciplines face quite great challenges. So I wonder, what are your thoughts on the future of the humanities, perhaps especially literature and history, and have you already maybe found tools to kind of connect those disciplines with kind of models of societal impact, or how to operationalize societal impact with in relation to these disciplines?
Well, having been a dean for 8 years of humanities, I dare to say that humanities and also social sciences have never been better than now, and not 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we were, as social sciences and humanities, we were just a little brother and sister who, you know, got one potato, and then the parents were going to talk with the grown-ups. But now, more and more, if you look at Horizon 2020, more and more, also in Brussels, people begin to understand that, for instance, healthy aging needs humanities and social sciences. It's not only about how old we are going to get, but it is also how the quality of our lives is going to be. And therefore we need the social sciences and humanities. Now, in linguistics, there are many examples where they work together with people from the medical faculty, people from neuropsychology, working on dyslexia and aphasia. People in social economic science, they tie up with people in law, in social sciences, even in medical sciences, even in geographical sciences. There are lots and lots of examples. So if people from the humanities say, well, this holds not true for us, it's not true. You have to maybe shift your point of view just a little bit. And then you can see how also, for instance, research into literary historical mechanisms fit into historical mechanisms and fit into models that sociology is using, but then seen from the past. We have never seen more interest within a wider audience for the past in general. I don't know how it's in Finland, but in my country, archaeology is thriving more than some people from the natural science would want to. There was a Roman ship that was excavated, and it was open for the public for only 2 Saturdays. In total, there were 45,000 people coming to look at it. And there are lots of examples.
Now I would like to have the last question, and since this is called catch box, you really need to have to catch it.
So you got to qualify to be able to ask a question here. So you mentioned that most internal reward mechanisms, certainly at a personal level, are geared towards research through age indices, through personal grants, and so on. So do you have any suggestions for how we can change this and also include teaching in a meaningful personal reward mechanism at a university? Thank you.
I don't have the concrete answers. Otherwise, I would be very rich, I think. But let's say if your course as a teacher is graded an A plus by the students, somebody should notice it. Somebody should make a note of it and say, hey, this is somebody who stands out within teaching the course, and it was rated like an A. And when students complain about a course, we should do something about it. Which means, after 2 years or 3 years, firing the professor. I know I'm, everybody's looking now, like, but as a dean, I fired 5 professors because of their really bad teaching, or no teaching at all. But, you know, yeah, there's always the argument, the law can do that. The law can, if you make an arrangement beforehand and not look back. So make an appointment with the professor saying, next year you gotta have a B or an A minus. And if it's not done, then after a year, and then you can go to court and fire people. They don't belong in academia if you can't teach. I'm very sorry. Now I'm cutting it very short. Except for Mr. Einstein, who couldn't even make his own tea or even bake an egg. But if you have an Einstein in your university, put him in or her in a glass cage and give him or her the breakfast and supper, try to keep her alive. But we're not all Einsteins. That's an exception to the rule. But if you don't want to teach, and if you cannot teach, get out. Out of academia. That's my point of view.
Excellent.
No, thank you. I hope I'll make it to Schiphol tomorrow.
I think this is a good moment to elaborate the discussion to the panel discussion. So thank you for this, Viljan, and thank you everybody for participating. Don't go anywhere. Don't disappear yet. Toilets are closed, but come back, please. So next, I would like to call on stage a couple of other very distinguished guests and speakers who are going to be following this path of different themes and topics. So first of all, from University of Glasgow, Rosemarie Barble. Welcome. She's the Research Impact Manager and who tries to make sure that researchers understand and articulate impact. Warm welcome. Then we have the Vice Rector of the University of Turku, Rita. Welcome. And also my dear colleague Jaakko Kuosmanen from Demos Helsinki. Right, so what we're going to do now is we have about an hour, a bit less, and we've heard interesting discussion and insightful keynote presentation. So I would like to start with Rosemarie, with you. What are your thoughts on what we've heard? And then, first of all, what on earth is a research impact manager?
So I guess the first thing I would like to say is, speaking as somebody from the same decade, can I please speak up for people in their 60s? Absolutely, this is not the case. I do not find that they are resistant to change. Some of the most inspirational people that I deal with are some of my senior researchers who really lead the way and put flesh on the bones of what we're doing. So I must say, no ageism, please, none. So a research impact manager actually is something that it's a burgeoning field in the UK. I will say that my introduction to impact came about 30 years ago, actually. The concept, before impact, the word was adopted, abused, and completely, taken, I don't know, to where it's gone today. I was working in the international development sector in the Middle East, and I was hosting a researcher from England, and we were going to a refugee camp, and I had arranged for him to interview a head teacher. And doing that for the head teacher was a little bit risky. It was putting his profile above the parapet a little bit. And I was asking the researcher as we were driving in the taxi, and I said, tell me about your research. And first of all, he couldn't do that. And I think I just said, well, I had a tutor in graduate school who said, if you can't explain your central thesis in 3 sentences, you don't have one. And I think that maybe put him off. And then I said, okay, well, let's cut to the chase. Tell me what is going to happen as a result of what you're doing. And he said, I will get my PhD out of this. And right there and then I thought, first of all, I wanted to throw him out of the taxi, but I did not. And I thought, but wait a minute, but what about these people who are giving you their time and their knowledge and their lived experiences? Surely there's more than a PhD coming out of this. And this was, well, 30 years ago, before impact was ever a thing, was ever a stick that we used to beat academics with. But I suppose it was that experience and 10 years in that sector where you are always being paid for by public money from one or more countries. You are always telling people what the previous situation was, what you think you might do to affect that situation in this next period with that sum of money, and then measuring and showing the story of what you've done. It was just natural. So it was completely surprising to me when I came to UK higher education, and there was not that. We were only beginning to have the first mutterings of, we give so much money, what do we get out of it? And then we were very lucky in a way because we got the formal driver of the Research Excellence Framework, the REF. So I came to Glasgow University, actually was handed the responsibility for coordinating our very first impact submission to the REF. And that meant talking to hundreds of researchers about their research from every discipline and trying to fit them into what felt like a very awkward framework. It was very stressful conversations. I'm sitting with people who have 20, 30 years in their field. Do you have impact? But my starting point was always, you do. Let's see how we can fit it to this framework that has been imposed on us and that we need, we need to respond to this and satisfy this in order to gain our rankings, gain our, funding, etc. But I never ever doubt that every single researcher I work with has something to add of value to us as a society. And I guess as a starting point, it means my conversations are very positive. So I try and get people to work within our current framework without distorting what it is they do. I never want them to get away from their research. And actually, I would take issue with putting the problem in the middle of your model, just to be a teeny bit critical. I never start with the problem. I never start with the impact, because that's out there. I always start with the, what is your research? And then take that step back and go to, okay, in that context, what is it that's happening or not happening out there that I think my research can affect? And I think just small things can influence, you know, the way people think about impact. But research impact managers, it really is a profession in a sense that came on the back of the REF. There are many now, but Glasgow was one of the first to actually retain that role, and partly that was because, not being clueless, I told them that since this was our changed environment, we needed to look at how we could achieve the change in our research culture and activity that responded to that environment. So that just wasn't about communicating outwards and advocating for what we do, but it was about looking at our promotion and performance assessment pathways. It was about putting resource in terms of money, in terms of people. It was also aligning our research development expertise with that impact literacy. So your research development doesn't happen in isolation. So it was an integrated, holistic approach. Now there are a lot of research impact posts in the UK. I would say that the impact literacy level is still not where it should be. And that is what an impact manager does. I think a lot of it is about REF at the moment. What I would say is I try not to let our need as an institution to respond to that external assessment interfere with the conversations we have, getting people to do that kind of personal impact planning. REF is just a mining exercise. We have to change our environment and our culture and how we do things. I just then run along at REF time and mine the results of that. But if we don't change the way people approach their research and the way they think about it, I will have nothing to mine. So it has to be holistic. And I think when you were saying about the teaching and how to do that, but if teaching is seen and known to be a legitimate pathway to promotion, as we have, you know, done in Glasgow, where we have made our assessment criteria for all levels of academic staff and all professorial zones coherent and consistent, and in most cases not aligned to REF, because it's not realistic for younger researchers, then they know that impact is a genuine pathway to promotion, as is research, you know, as is education. So it's a very holistic approach. Extremely labor intensive, I will say, but you know us, you know, people in our 60s, loads of energy. So it's the funnest job you could have, I have to say, because you are always bringing an appreciation of what somebody is doing to the conversation, because that is my starting point. And so actually, I would take issue with the women in English language and literature. I think that it's really just about looking at what you do. We have I don't know if you do it here for the kids, it's the Where's Wally map. And you get the little tiny person and there's a million people around and you always have to find Wally. Basically, that's all you have to do. Whatever research area you are in that map. You just have to find your space. And then you know who it is that's immediately around you. So regardless of whether you're doing 17th century scientific, botany catalogs, or you're doing 3,000-year-old, Aramaic translation, it doesn't matter. There's always an external. It's not the same map as a particle physicist or somebody working in precision medicine, but you have a map, and we try and encourage people through a process of interrogation to find themselves in that map. Does that make sense? I don't know. It makes sense to me when I'm saying it, but I never know if it makes sense to anybody else.
Excellent. It does make sense.
Oh, good.
Yeah, because then it also somehow is a reflection that how should you position yourself? You think about all these people around you.
Absolutely.
Everyone else are, in blue collar or yellow collar, but you are red. So understand your position in this and your speciality.
And there may well be some people in the red whose most immediate audience and most important audience is a second tier of researchers, and that's okay. Yeah. I think we have to recognize those differences that stem from what is the research you're doing.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Now, two things. First is that, don't worry, in some time I start looking at my mobile phone, and that's only because I want to check that what is everyone else talking in Twitter, so don't mind that. The second point is actually something that I will steal from Thomas Wilhelmsson, because he pointed out that this is the first panel that he ever heard talking about societal impact that consists only of people from humanities.
I would say that I'm not actually, so I work across all of the disciplines. I was going to say that, in fact. So
you're Wally with different clothes.
Definitely.
Great. So glad to have you. Thank you. Let's move to Rita. As a Vice Rector for the University of Turku, I'm pretty sure these somehow resonated with you, all this discussion, and societal impact must be something that you have been thinking a lot in Turku. What are your thoughts on the whole big topic?
Well, as you mentioned, my background is also in humanities, and it's in Russian studies, language and history. But for I would say for the last 20 years, I have been very much involved in the development of higher education, and especially education, teaching and learning, both at institutional, national and international, both Nordic and European level. I would say that without the Bologna process, I wouldn't be here, because it has been very characteristic for the last 20 years. And of course, I agree very much with the productive interaction and the importance of education, because as I would say that my personal mission in the life also has been to educate young people for the future. As the Finnish Universities Act stipulates, we are educating students for the fatherland and mankind, and that's of course very important for me. I was thinking also about the productive interaction from the point of view of Turku-Åbo, and I think that we have very good basis for it here, because we have such a close collaboration not only between the universities and University of Applied Sciences, but also with the city and the region. So we had a very good basis for that, and we also already have that interaction, but of course it could be strengthened, and there are many opportunities I can see here. What is also maybe what could be fruitful is that in the Universities Act from 2010, the composition of university boards changed, and as far as I understand, there are very different situations in different universities. What is the real impact of the external board members? But in the best case, they could be very important actors here too, and fruitful for the interaction. We also have advisory boards in most faculties, at least in University of Turku. Every faculty has an external advisory board, and at least some of them have been very active also in curriculum development. So they help in designing education, and we also have a system of professors of practice. And we just yesterday had lectures of the newest professors of practice at the university, and for the last 2 years, as we have had these professors of practice, there was much of criticism against this system from the academia at the beginning, but we can see already that they have been very important even for research projects. For instance, the flagship project we just got there, one very important actor is one our professor of practice, and he's leading one group, the research group, and so on. So I think we have it, but maybe we can't use it well enough yet. And what was also interesting, what I have been thinking a lot, is the changing role of universities in education, and especially in degree education. And of course, we have lost the monopoly for higher learning. That's clear. So far, we have more or less the monopoly of certificating that learning. But it's very important to be proactive in this also. And I must say that I don't believe in online degrees. There are some institutions that start to offer totally online degrees. I believe very much in that kind of blended learning, where you use also online courses, but you need also face-to-face interaction, and there we have to take take our position too. The other side of my job has been quality assurance, and from that point of view, MOOCs are also a difficult thing, because there is no real quality assurance system for the MOOCs, and that's why they are different from degree education in general. I was for many years in the Finnish Quality Assurance Agency as a member and a chair, and now I'm the member of the European Quality Assurance Register Committee, which is evaluating the quality assurance agencies. And in the European system for quality assurance and the guidelines and standards, we can also see the shift towards learning and education, and especially student-centered point of view, and so on, from the quality systems towards learning and the quality of degrees and quality of learning, and so. But of course, research impact is also important. But maybe it's good, because I'm looking at this more from the point of view of education, and so we complete each other, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, and it's good that you brought up the structure of professor of practice, because it's not only the universities who are kind of benefiting and enriching from this system, but it's also those people who are able to come back to the university for some sharing some of their time. I think for Åbo Academy there's also Maria Laamanen, at least from the Ministry of Environment, who is doing this, and she was really enthusiastic about this.
Yeah, and if I could add one point more, many of these professors of practice are so to say interdisciplinary. So for instance, a professor of practice for humanities and medicine, a joint professor of practice. And it's also a big chance to develop education and research, so combining several disciplines.
Exactly. Thank you. So nice to have you in the panel. Welcome. Then we move to Jaakko Horsemen.
Hello.
Hello and welcome. Jaakko is at the moment my colleague still in Demos Helsinki, but soon, in a couple of weeks, you will be starting a new adventure at as a secretary of academy at the Finnish Academy of Science and Letters. For those of you who know this new currently made shift or move, is that the Ministry of Education has funded a mechanism called something of a science advisory for the government or something like this, and Jaakko will have a prominent role there. Of course, a big question of impact and science and new interfaces. And of course, I know also that you've been working a lot with long-termism and policy questions. So from this background, how did you hear the discussion around here?
So, so I'm very happy to be the junior here among you distinguished ladies and gentlemen here. So maybe just to kind of give a little bit of background of who I am actually. And so I've worn hats inside and outside academia for a while. I started off as a philosophy student in Tampere. And then I moved from there to Edinburgh, which is then, obviously we could have a further chat about Glasgow and Edinburgh, but we already connected in the lobby when you came in. So I did my PhD in Edinburgh on political science, and then I went for a short period at the Council of Europe as a researcher, and then I went to Oxford where I was a lecturer and a postdoc for 4+ years. At an institute called Oxford Martin School, which is a kind of interdisciplinary research institute focusing very much on impact as well. And so we had a project there focusing on long-term governance. And we tried to bring disciplines together. Even disciplines from humanities, sometimes it's very hard to cross bridges, as you would know, but it's very, very important and crucial. But even to get the lawyers and philosophers and political scientists to speak among each other, it does require a lot of coffee, pubs, and breakfast and lunches, but you'll get there. And from there on, I went to work at Demos Helsinki think tank, which is basically dropping academic research and doing and finding ways to impact. So basically, while it's a think tank, it's a kind of a do tank as well, because then the idea is that we're first and foremost trying to create positive societal impact, trying to find the pathways there. And obviously, their doing is a lot of importance, but also research and analysis and knowledge to support what we do is what we can find the pathways to impact. So I've been working with a lot of public sector institutions, a lot of ministries, prime minister's offices around the world, UNDP, places to look into, for example, how should we transform the machinery of government to be more responsive and receptive to scientific work, in order to, for example, the governments to be able to do what Sustainable Development Goals require, which is their transformative goals, which means you cannot do business as usual. They require transformation both in societies, but both in the ways that we actually operate the whole society. So machinery of government is a good just kind of accelerator there, but it can be a blockage as well. And so I worked from different angles towards and looking at how government works and how it doesn't work. And obviously, it's important to separate politics and governance, which are the two kind of domains. And sometimes it's much easier to affect governance than politics. Sometimes it depends on the environment where we operate. But basically, my idea has been always about the question of my work has been about the question of how do we make governments to be more long-term oriented? And we know that 4-year electoral cycle is a very good example of why politics takes over governance and politics takes over reason and rationality even sometimes. And it's a puzzle, right? It's a very, very challenging domain. Some people say, well, yes, so we give up democracy and there you go. But I don't think that's the answer, to be honest. So there's still the question about, for me, basically at the core of it and many long-term governance is science. And science is about progress, basically. With science, you can find the type of evidence that can help us in understanding risks, can help us in understanding causality, probability, can help us in understanding the epistemic environment where we operate, within which we can better create hypotheses about how, get from A to B, how to make things work. And there, I think, so for me, also in long-term governance is at the core of it is science, a lot of it. There's a lot of things that can be and should be done between the boundary of politics and policy making and governance and science. There's a lot that has been already done and a lot of things that we don't actually see, like a lot of things like medical regulations or other things are based on scientific research. So a lot of things are already being steered with science. But at the same time, it is in many ways also a Wild West still, that boundary between policy making, governance, and science, that there remains a lot to be done to kind of revisit that and how we can bridge those links. And I don't think it's a way. I was really enjoying many of your comments before on looking at things from a systems level and trying to understand these as a more kind of complex systems of interactions and potential productive interactions, instead of looking at some sort of a linear model where you do the research, you give it to policymakers, to civil servants, and then they'll look at it and go, yes, this is what we should do. It's more about informing, and it's more about creating this kind of broader framework of multiple different types of engagement models where you actually try to look at it and create a little by little, look at these little strings where you can improve things and the overall effectiveness of the system as such. So that's kind of a very macro level of things, how I see.
Excellent, thank you. Super, by the way, whenever you have comment or anything you want to say, just cut in. But I know that there's a lot of you already with questions in your mind, but I have a couple of questions to start with, and then we will go to the audience too. I know we've kind of already discussed this, but let's explicitly address the question that now that you think of universities from your perspective, in your experience as well, what are now the key challenges in this whole impact thing? Because it somehow seems to be a complex thing that is perplexing and hard to grasp, and now on a university level, and I'm also thinking here now the strategy process of Åbo Academy University. So what are kind of the key challenges from your experience, and then also ways to overcome them?
In the UK context, I would say that impact has had a distorting effect. In some ways, it has been very negative in some ways, because people are scrambling to talk about impact, to say they're doing impact, which is impossible because we don't do it. It happens out there as a result of the activities and engagement that we do based on our research. You know, and it has created a sort of a frenzy around impact that I think is not helpful. And so what has happened is that you know, we have a network in the UK of you know, during the last REF, which we formed, and I was quite interested to see the measures that were being taken or not taken in universities. Some were just throwing external consultants to just write up case studies. Others were incentivizing with money, but nobody was doing anything really holistic. And I think that because we are under such a pressure, the REF is you know, the basis on which our funding is allocated. Impact for us is worth millions and millions of pounds. One impact case study is worth financially to us the same as 10 to 12 research publications. That's not right, but that is the reality. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure on anybody working in impact, but it is a lot, it's very distorting, so you can see how that would distort things. So I think dealing with that is a challenge, and what we've been trying to do is to deal with the exercise almost separately, but actually to embed the understanding in a much better way, and to bring real life to phrases like breaking down the silos. So just before I came here yesterday, I had gathered PIs, lead academics on case studies, but also anybody who was working on a project where they felt that they might have some impacts in the education sector. So and it was a very targeted audience, working with my colleagues in the colleges to identify them, brought them into a room, and then I had 3 PIs who I know their impact histories very well. They all came from very different backgrounds. One was from computing science, one was from history, and one was from School of Education, who's had kind of international policy impacts. Computing education, he's completely transformed computing pedagogy, computing science pedagogy in Scotland, and the history person had really kind of transformed the teacher resources for Scottish history. So I brought them in the room, and I also brought somebody from Education Scotland, which is our main body for curriculum development, you know, for the education system in Scotland. We're very lucky in Scotland, a bit like, you know, so similar to Finland. We are not subject to the UK education system. We are independent in that respect. But brought them in, had them talk about their work and how they ended up kind of delivering the benefits that they did. How did they get started? You know, education sector, it's a huge monolithic term. It gives off this impression of a wall. How does somebody who maybe visits some schools but has a great idea, how do they scale up? How do they get in? And we also had a person who's a postdoc with us now who was a teacher. So he was then also giving the, you know, and just sharing that knowledge. It doesn't take a lot of arranging, you know, it doesn't take a huge amount of money, But the conversation, it was extremely interactive. Everybody went around the room and talked about what they were doing and what questions they had, how could they get in here, and simple, small things. You would think the internet had never been invented, by the way, because some of the questions from the researchers, I thought, I could Google this and find it in 2 seconds. But it's better that they have a person in the room that says, oh, there's a professional subject association for that, and you can get in touch with them here. Or they would say, by the way, did you know that Education Scotland has no authority to have the email addresses for all teachers in Scotland? Well, nobody knew that in the room. So how do you reach them? Facebook, apparently, is the most effective way to reach our teachers. I didn't know that. I would have thought there were other, no, Facebook. And it's the insights gained from the Education Scotland person who works on a regular basis with projects that are delivering curricular reform and enhancements to teachers' professional development. It's from practitioners, the teachers, and it's from the people who have actually worked in the field and delivered impacts. So it's, I think our challenge is to minimize the distortion and to address things on multiple levels so that researchers are supported, they're rewarded, and they are, practicing, changing their practice where they can, but in a cohesive manner that doesn't make impact an extra thing on that list. One of the critical things that we get told all the time is, I don't have time for impact. My teaching load is enormous. And it's something that we face very specifically, I suppose, in the UK, the pressure to bring in postgraduate taught and postgraduate research students, because that is where the money is. So our teaching numbers have gone through the roof. In the meantime, I'm sitting there saying, you have an impact case study, I need you to work with me. We need to, and we have, look at our workload model. So, and this is where, you need to have reward and recognition systems. You need to have training and resource. We also have specific funds that are targeted to projects that are very, very closely geared to an interaction with an external partner. And I always want to know what is going to be the next step after that project. But then there's also the workload model. And it is saying, if we really value impact, how are we addressing the workload when they have 3 times the number of students this year that they did last year? So it's a combination, a combined approach.
Exactly. Can I respond?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Maybe shortly. First of all, just separate the things. First of all, you said the ref was distortion. I saw that from my English colleagues. Now, by the way, they're singing a different tune. Now my English colleagues say, hey, after the first ref, I'm very much prepared for the next round, and I'm very much aware of what impact is.
That is true.
So that's one remark.
That's a positive.
And if you compare that to what German professors say, you would have another story. So that's one thing. The other thing is, my ultimate goal would be that societal impact is not the third mission.
I agree.
It should be a part of the first and second mission.
Absolutely.
Teaching and research.
Absolutely agree with that.
Impact is not a third mission. It's a vital part of teaching and research. And as long as the British government keeps saying, well, there is the third mission, and here's a lot of money, and that's attached to it, then the researchers will go nuts.
I completely agree.
In
fact, I'm always taking issue with impact as the third mission, because impact is the outcome of, it should be embedded, the awareness of it should be embedded in your teaching and your research.
And my last remark would be, you started with a story 20 years ago about somebody who couldn't say. There's still a lot of professors who cannot say what their research is. Yeah. And I'm seeing them, hearing them every day. So that's not over.
I completely agree.
Not in the past.
I would say there have been a lot of positives. in working with European colleagues we had a Horizon 2020 project that was looking at what are the mechanisms for impact generation in STEM subjects, and can some of these be transferred and adapted to social sciences and humanities. I was interested because the awareness of societal impact and that kind of agenda was high among all of them, but for example, my Italian colleagues told me they have no way to incentivize people to engage with this. So if you're interested and you do it, that's great. And if you're not, there's nothing in the system.
Right.
You know, so yes, there were definitely varying levels of incentivization. Even sometimes I would argue understanding and awareness. They know it's out there, they know it's coming, or it's in some form. But yes, I think for me personally, I think overall it's been a very positive development. When I say distortion, I guess what I mean is when it's attached to that formal assessment, the stress that it creates means that people don't think clearly about it. They are already doing so much of the engagement and activities that they need to do in order to deliver impact. So in a way, what we need to do is make them aware that they're already doing it, help them to support, record, and evidence that, but also you know, allow them to do that where they are really motivated and engaged in a way that doesn't break them apart because they have a workload that's unmanageable.
That's why we in the Netherlands have the standard evaluation protocol, which is comparable to the REF, but there's no governmental money attached to it. And that makes a huge, huge difference.
I think the money, I mean, I find the REF a really interesting sort of monster to deal with because, of course, before the first REF, in a way, we were all told we were given the benefit of the doubt. So they want to show that research and all the money that they spend on it has positive benefits to society. So we were given a bit of a pass, even though we spent millions, you know, responding to the demands. But I would say that now we're being told, oh, well, financially, if you don't have a 4-star impact case study, it's worth nothing. Or, you know, oh my, you know, we're making it even more, you know, stressful and counterproductive, actually.
Yeah.
Great. I think this is something very important now that you just mentioned really quickly, the kind of idea that interaction or impact things, third mission things are something that are on the top of everything. So it's kind of like in a really small scale, that means that I would just like to do whatever I want, don't mind me with impact. And this is really, really, I think, widespread. And how many of you recognize this kind of thinking? That I don't want to do interaction, I don't want to do impact, I don't want to do communication, just let me do whatever I want. I want to do research. Raise your hand. Yeah. It's 1/3, something like this. And yet, universities are organized in a way that they really have structures that support third mission activities. So there's kind of a paradoxical way to see this. Before we go to you, then please, Rita.
Yeah, I have been wondering that maybe one reason for that kind of thinking is that we have started to talk about third mission, because I think that universities have 2 missions: education and research.
That's right.
And this so-called third mission, interaction and so on, it's an integrated part of these 2. And I'm very lucky now to have the concept of productive interaction because it's very useful. But it's one reason for that kind of thing, that it is something extra. It's not not an integrated part.
Oh my God, we have a third mission. Yeah. And next year we have a 4th mission, and then the 5th. And then we have to go to Africa. And
so maybe I'll just, so I very much agree, and this is something that seems to be, so we've done, so with demos, we've done, for example, impact strategy work with a couple of universities, for example, and something that has been really, really hard because it's been kind of embedded in the academic culture through the formal system of recognition of a certain type of impact. The idea that there is a internal tensions within university, even because of that, relating, for example, to research and education in a way that if you think about just, universities as part of societies, they do research and they do education, and they have, both of them have impact one way or another. They will have either more direct or indirect, longer term in the future or now. So mathematics can lead to, in hundreds of years, it can lead to computers, etc. So it's a very long trajectory of curve for impact, but as such, that researcher hasn't been talking to very many people necessarily, or doing the formal impact mission. So in that sense, there's a kind of the formal system, when it's applied, it creates certain internal tensions also within universities that are, they're very hard to break through, obviously, because the formal structures guide, and people are, they need to have their salaries in order to continue, most of us, and have to feed ourselves. So. But ultimately, like, one educator can have a very, very strong impact on, because if they're just very, very, good educators. In the same way that, when you think about impact in the political context, one of the best ways to have create a ground, movement, for example, Jeremy Corbyn type, is have that one guy in the pub who's very, very enthusiastic and just dominates the conversation for the whole evening and doesn't talk anything about but Jeremy Corbyn. And these are very powerful kind of tools for impact. One single person in the pub. So in the same way that the enthusiastic researchers or educators can be very, but that can lead to impact. But the formal system creates these tensions. I don't know how to get through that, but.
But I think it's maybe recognizing that there is not one impact model. And one of the things I always, when I'm speaking to researchers in a workshop, for example, I would say that, when you do look at your research, you place it in that context, you identify all of these things, you're also thinking about, you think about that research, but also what is, what harmonizes with your personality and skill set as well as your research. If you are not the type of person who's out there happy, clappy, glad handing, people don't do it. We have a guy who sits in a room and has sat in a room for 35 years developing statistical models for rubber-like solids, human tissues, everything. He is amazing. There are people out there who think he's a god. He hates people. He doesn't like to interact with anybody. Would we interfere with that? Not at all. So we're relatively lucky in a sense in that there is an awareness in the funding councils that it's a journey. Yeah. So for your research, if it is not relevant for you to be doing certain of these externally facing activities, you simply have to explain it. That's all. What they want to know is that you have thought about it. You have understood that ultimate, maybe 100 years down the line, impact of what you're doing. So it isn't that they want everybody doing these carbon cutout activities or engagement or industrial partnerships, but it's that you know ultimately where this might fill a gap. He sits in his room, we let him sit in his room. I would never, the people in physics know that as a collective, there's a whole bunch of them who are never going to deliver visible, demonstrable impacts to society for 100 years. But that's okay. In their collective, the optics guys do it all. So that's fine. But what I do always tell people, though, is you would be surprised. So one of those physics researchers was actually commissioning a lens for a specific project. From he needed it from a lens manufacturer, paid loads of money. Well, they actually got really interested in the properties of this lens and ended up manufacturing that lens. It's a very specialized, clearly specialized market, extremely expensive product, but they took what was going to be simply a research instrument for him and passed that up. Now, he never expected that. So impact can surprise you. And I guess I just don't want models to be imposed that says everybody has to do public engagement. Everybody has to do this. That's not how it works.
One more comment and then we go to the last question.
That's exactly what I meant by the dynamic process, going back and forth. And I did, just to catch up with that, I did 2 experiments. I'll just tell you about one with theoretical mathematicians. there was a group of 5, 1 full professor, there was 1 associate professor, there were 2 assistant professors and a postdoc. That's it. And I asked them individually, in what kind of societal context are you working? And the answers were none. I didn't have to write anything down. So my collection was 1 blank page. And then I got the group together and I told them about half an hour like this about the dynamics of research and how it goes and stakeholders, etc. And then I said to them, I leave you as a group alone in this room for 2 hours, I'll lock you up, and then I'll lock you after 2 hours, and let's see if you come up with a story. And it was surprising what their story was. How much together they found that without their research, there would be no bank secrecy. There would be some bridges would not be built.
Exactly.
Et cetera, et cetera. And they had a whole list. I could write down a whole list as a group. And the second thing I found interesting was that the woman postdoc was the best in phrasing it, not the full professor. So I thought, I'm in a foreign country anyway, so they can find me. So I'm going to say it. And I said, why don't you let the woman do the word if the outside world asks you what you're doing? And the full professor, of course, got red and mad as hell because he was the full professor. But they all agreed that that would be the wisest thing to do. And then I left the room.
This issue of fundamental research and areas like maths that really struggle in the ref. And that's, again, also what I mean about that distorting effect and that single model. The poor mathematicians. I mean, we work with them so much, but they struggle. And what happens? All of their impact case studies come from stats. Thankfully, they're in the same unit of assessment in the ref. Because, yes, they will have impact. They are contributing massively. But in the model that is the ref-defined, definition of impact, they struggle. They do struggle. And that's what so I have a lot of pluses, but a lot of minuses about the ref. And that is why I try and, when we work with our researchers, we try and leave the ref aside. And it's completely immaterial, actually, to how you think about your research and how you think about the potential societal impacts. Now, it will have a positive benefit for you to think about that when it comes to research funding in the UK, certainly, because you have to be able to articulate where you sit in that Where's Wally map. But ref is an entirely different kettle of fish. So that's why I do try and keep them a little bit separate. But it has been a useful kettle of fish, by the way. So.
Okay, thank you. Now, my unpleasant duty is to have a look at the clock. And it's 10 past. And therefore, I had a list of questions. I asked one of them, so I will ask a second one, because it's a panel discussion, and I'm supposed to ask questions. The question is about future, and quite simply, it is about the future of universities and where is this going, and the impact agenda, and what kind of changes are we to anticipate in this field of action. Universities. What are your shortish predictions of what's going to happen to universities in Europe and in your own context in the future? And especially what should be taken into account when some people in the room are thinking about strategy in the near future?
Well, I think I already answered the question. In the future, there's going to be differentiation between types of universities. And the question for your university is, what type do we want to be? Maybe that's not an answer at all, but
Yep. That is a very
there is
good
no
question.
direction in which university will go.
So what kind of a university do you want to be?
I would say I would actually agree with that. I think to a certain extent, but not completely. I actually think that universities, if we are clever, are going to be looking much more at where we are in our cities and regions, etc. I love Glasgow University. I think we do some amazing things, but we are always talking about ourselves as a Russell Group university. So Russell Group is the top, research-intensive universities in the UK. But we are so different from Oxford or, Cambridge or Edinburgh. We're very different, and I think that for us to really succeed in sustainable growth as an institution, I think we need to reconnect with where we are in Glasgow, which is the most amazing living lab if you're talking about societal impact. It's incredible. And reconnect with what we do really well, rather than aiming out there for these kind of top line, I was talking about some initiative that we're involved in Scotland, and what I felt was the initiative was brought out by the government, and it's, we're going to do this, and I said, okay, but what are we as Glasgow bringing to the table? Remind ourselves of our strengths, and actually, it's a very similar situation for the university here. What is it you're really good at? What is your context here in which you can really make a difference? And then when you have identified that, that's when you can see the connections with other locations, other cities, other issues, other countries, and you, I think, can grow in a more sustainable way. Sometimes we try and be everything, and I think there's too much of a gap between the top level initiatives and who we are as an institution, where our strengths lie. We do have a lot of messaging, I'll say in this room, around what we're good at. But sometimes when I unpick that, and I am the impact manager, I need to unpick it, I need to find evidence, I sometimes don't find it. So our headline is big and bold, but our reality is not that. So wait a minute, what are we doing in that field that is really strong, that is really good? And where do we fit in that bigger story? Sometimes we don't want to admit that we're not good at everything, or, and I just think it is about reconnecting with the community. We had there was an old abandoned carpet factory in the east end of Glasgow. We have some of the highest levels of deprivation and inequality in Western Europe are in Glasgow. And we took over this wonderful old building that used to be a carpet factory. And, this was some years back, and we were going to have a hub in the East End, and we were going to put researchers there, and we were going to be in the community. Well, we couldn't get a single researcher to have their office there. And they just couldn't figure it out. And I said, yes, but that's because you did this as a top-down thing. What you didn't do was map out who is already working in the East End, who has the relationships with the women's library and the domestic abuse place and, the poverty center and the nurseries, and who is already working there. Instead, they went top down. This is the headline, we're in the East End. Well, we're not in the East End. But we are. And they didn't look at where we're already strong and then build on that. Instead, they imposed it and said, this is what we're going to do there. But those areas of research did not have any, the researchers had no connection with. It was artificial. And I guess we need to do that at every level. So now that they have done that, that East End hub is really thriving, and now we have the Glasgow Centre for Population Health is co-located there. There's a lot more interaction between researchers and a major kind of agency for impact. They are down the block from the Glasgow Women's Library, which does amazing stuff and is partnered with loads of researchers. It's a much more honest reflection of where our strengths lie. I guess I just feel that gap is sometimes where we fall in. And so these headline initiatives, I would start with, what are we doing? Where are our relationships? You know, what have we done? And work from the bottom up, but make bottom up really honest and real and rooted in what's going on.
Excellent. Thank you. Moving forward.
Well, if I continue from that, I think that the challenge number one is this need for internal change. And if I look at it from the point of view of Finnish higher education, I think there are at least 3 points, 3 parts. The first one is internationalization, and it's not only attracting international students, but also being more open, not only in the academia, but also in the society, for international graduates and international students, people from other countries. And on the other hand, of course, we also have growing immigration, although that's not that wide in Finland, but anyway, it's growing, and we should, and the percentage of immigrant people in higher education is much lower than the percentage in the society. So internationalization is one thing. Another thing is widening participation in general. This so-called social dimension of the European higher education area hasn't been a discussion in Finland, but now I think it's starting, because we have had a well, we used to say that it is a country of equal opportunities and so on and so forth. But now we see how important, for instance, the socio-economic background is for your future, and it's another part of this widening participation in higher education, and I think that it requires also changes in our ways of teaching and learning, understanding learning. And of course the third one is what has already been mentioned here, is the rapidly changing working life and the need for lifelong learning. And I think that maybe I could compare it with what I said about third mission. Now we think that we have the higher education, and then we have the lifelong learning. But in a way that we have 2 missions, 2 tasks, and societal interaction is integrated in these 2. I think that we should maybe a bit rethink of our education too, so that there is this higher education, and it means degree education and different kinds of continuous lifelong learning and open university and so on. So, but it's a heavy task to make this internal change. But I think that we need it in order to manage, and it's also connected with the differentiation of universities. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Jaakko.
Yeah, so I think you've pretty much emptied the bank in many ways, but just to add to those few things maybe, and I think you had very good points. What I think about when I think about universities, and when we go back to the idea of impact to begin with, is that universities, whatever form they do, whatever they do, they will have impact of some sort. So the first question would be to ask, what sort of impact do universities want to make and what they want to achieve? So in Finland, for example, if we look at historically, we know that universities have been part of building the national identity, the welfare state, the economic growth, the innovation policy, and then the question would be, the 2020s, 2030s question mark. What is that the universities want to be? Question mark. And this is obviously one, it's internal soul searching, self-understanding of what we do, how we do what we do, basically is research and impact. So that question, obviously, that is done in relation to what's happening around us, because universities are not solipsistic, insular institutions, but rather, we have to look at it in a dynamic relationship. And there, once we see the terrain of information, where you have all these different types of organizations and information overloads and digitalization that brings information and knowledge to different places, and also business kind of actors that are building their internal research and scientific capabilities, which are in many ways competitors. So, I mean, when you said, William, in the beginning that the universities and churches have been the ones to survive, and I think there is a real existential threat to universities in many ways. I mean, don't want to kind of, you know, be the doomsday prophet, but that is a serious question, because the playing field has changed in many ways, and that playing field changing requires that universities really need to think what they want to be, what do they want to achieve, and how do they make sure that they survive in the next decades. And I think some things that separate them from many, like for example, internal research capabilities in businesses and others, would be the kind of the societal broader framework where you don't look at research, for example, as connected to innovations that lead to businesses that lead to profits, but rather as something of a, you know, overall benefit of humanity to begin with. So they explore the unknown unknowns, which can lead to the benefit of humanity as such, which would require, you know, things like ensuring that whatever universities do is research and education meets the peer review criteria at the highest level, so that there's this type of methodological rigor in what universities do to ensure that they maintain the kind of reliability in the operations of universities. So they're trustful institutions. I mean, in Finland, universities still are one of the most trusted institutions in the whole society, but we shouldn't take that as self-granted as well, which then I think one important factor there is exactly the kind of openness and inclusiveness of universities, so they don't appear to look as ivory towers, but rather as more inclusive and open. And I think, for example, in Helsinki, Tiedekulma is a very good example of that. It's, you know, big windows and open doors, and there was Tieteen päivät a couple of weeks ago, and Tarja Halonen, the former president, was speaking in the window, and then the kids, there were school children that walked past and recognized Tarja, and she was waving at them, and they were waving it back at her, and she was talking about science there. And then there was a person that you wouldn't necessarily think that is from the university, but had a rough life for the person, and he walked past the window and saw the president there, and he decided, well, I'm going to walk in and just hear what the president has to say, and nobody minded. I mean, he was absolutely fine to come there, and everyone was kind of like, please do come in. And then he was looking at Tarja speaking for 10-15 minutes, and then he walked out. And so to bring the university close to people as well is something that is very important of holding and kind of ensuring that happens, because that can break through the kind of polarization and the ivory tower idea of university.
Excellent. So opening up, and then also this question of existential risk is a thing that must be maybe taken into account in making a strategy and writing a strategic plan. So what could destroy us potentially in 10 years' time if there is somewhat of this kind of a threat? At this stage, thank you so much. Now, before I give the floor to Elina, I would like to give an opportunity for question and comment. Fine possibility. We have one there over. Yes.
Thank you. I like the comment in the panel that there should be more ways than one in order to implement the kind of social impact. Because Keynes once said that practical men think they have nothing to do with theories, but in fact they might be slaves under some defunct economist. And I have myself been involved both in interaction, but also in non-interactive work. And therefore I hope that there would really be place for all types of research. And finally, this should not be something that triggers yet another wave of reorganizations and a climate of fear. I just read a research article in a book about the downfall of Nokia, where just precisely those two things killed Nokia's innovativity. And I know that younger researchers who are not 64 often fear for the future. And those who are 64 have experienced in maybe 40 years' time reorganizations every second year. So if you will avoid people in the future saying leave me alone. There are some things we also should avoid when we change the university. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. Anyone else? Yes.
I couldn't quite follow his last sentence.
Thank you. We were supposed to say our names, so my name is Mikaela Björklund. I happen to be an internal board member at this university. What I will take with me, what I really liked in what you said, or understood from what you said, is that we actually need to infuse teaching in education, teaching in research, and the other way around. And I wonder if I understood you correctly. So that's sort of one of my takeaways. And the other is that I think what is really the important change, which you hinted at, is that we need to change the mindsets of our staff at the universities. And I think if we think in terms of what impact can we actually make with what we do, not for ourselves, but for someone else, that will achieve the change rather than just changing structures. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Before you go into the comments, is there anything else, question, comment at this stage? Good opportunity. One more. One more. I will throw it. Almost.
Thank you very much for a very thought-provoking panel discussion. My job at Åbo Academy is to help researchers write their research grants. And when we come to the impact section of the grant application, I indeed try to help them identify the purpose of their research on the map, so to speak, as was described here earlier. But many researchers argue, and I must say that to some extent I share this concern, that can't they say and think that their research has an intrinsic purpose of feeding curiosity and creating new knowledge. So I'm thinking that as a kind of counter attack against impact, don't get me wrong, I think this idea of societal impact is wonderful, but in order to prevent it from becoming research for the sake of impact, and to kind of maintain our conservative position, could we encourage our researchers to also put in a sentence that my research has a value in itself as a scientist, as a scientific community, as a message to politicians and governments?
Great, thank you. So there was a comment about diversity, then there was the infusion of teaching and research, and then there was the question of intrinsic value of science and research. Comments?
Can I just take that last one just
please,
while it's fresh in my mind? So
please, shortly also.
Yes, I do look at a lot of grant applications, just and the thing, I mean, I'm sure that the forms are probably fairly similar, and so there's obviously a whole section on academic impact. One of the main messages that I have to people is that I can't, I think you are absolutely right, there is an intrinsic value. I think that for the purposes of gaining funding, what I try and help people do is to, first of all, I would never encourage somebody to do research just because they think it will tick that impact box. Then you're not a credible and honest researcher, and by the way, I don't think you'll be successful. But I do think you can have that statement in there. What we ask them to do is to consider the very long journey. Then for the purposes of this grant, where might you be on that journey? And I never ever negate the possibility of impact arising from straightforward academic activity, such as conferences and papers. We see it all the time. So I think it's more about the messaging when you are doing the grant applications, it's an exercise, we have to do it, we want the grant capture, but I never encourage somebody to distort their research, integrity, I guess you'd say, by going for something just because they think it will score highly on the impact factor. But it's, there is a little bit here about communication to the funding council.
Thank you,
Would you
Rosemarie.
agree with that?
William,
yeah, I agree with that in the following sense. If a researcher comes to me and says, I cannot fill in, or I cannot think of any societal impact, it's just value in itself, the answer is I don't buy it. There is no value in itself. There's always value, but there is a lack of conscience of the value. And that's, I think, what you are trying also to say, is that make people more conscious about yes, there is a value. So I don't buy it. 20 years ago, they bought it. They say, no, I'm doing fundamental research. Oh, sorry. Sorry to have bothered you. Oh.
But you do cover the sort of value to the field of, to the body of knowledge in, I would assume, in your academic impact statement is would be my understanding. So.
Comments from here? Okay, so very big thank you for the panel. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. And then we have closing remarks from self-sufficient Elina Pirtaniemi, who is already there. So please.
Dear friends, colleagues, invited guests, we have a bit of a schedule problem, and I know I'm painfully aware that I'm in between you and the coffee, so I try to be efficient, straightforward, and so forth, brief. So I'd say that there are different ways to picture the future that lies ahead of us, and for me as a scholar who's focused on international and human rights, the most natural starting point is actually the work done under the auspices of United Nations. So here I really echo our keynote and the panelists, and that it's really the Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals that is my starting point for all this. And the 17 sustainable goals, which were already mentioned. They are actually enormous, as Keynote already emphasized. I mean, think about it. The goal number 1 is to end poverty in all its forms everywhere. I mean, it's huge. Or goal number 13 urges to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. Wow. Goal 16 again sends also a very, very clear but equally challenging message: promote just, peaceful and inclusive societies. So these only exemplify what we really have in front of us. And I think it's obvious that these goals can't be reached without the work of researchers and scientists. And we can't reach these goals without the hundreds or thousands, rather, students that work with us. It's clear. And if we take into account, which was also indicated here earlier, that we live in a world where a president of a certain great power refers to his natural instincts for science as an explanation for his doubts regarding climate change, I mean, then it's obvious that we really are needed. Research-based knowledge is truly needed. And I think that as part of the global scientific community, Åbo Academy has a duty to do its best together with our partners to contribute to all the efforts to get the global development to a sustainable track. And this can be done only if we understand how we can make research and research-based education impactful. And our discussions today, I must say, and obviously also the report, Guidelines for Impact, prepared by Demos, which was mentioned here earlier, they help us to understand how we can get there. And as we heard already in the panel also, that everybody has something to give, but we need to be better to understand where our role is and what is the position. So at Åbo Academy, we are rather small. So this means that we need to be very smart. And we need to think that what are the societal or technological or human problems we are best apt to address. Where are our most important strategic partners? Where is our contribution especially valuable? What do we want to do in order to make a difference? And these are the questions we need to be able to answer, and that's why we need to renew our strategy. It is very simple. Impactful research and education are, of course, just empty words, imaginary goals if we do not think strategically, if we don't act. And for example, if we want to reach the highest level in research in some focus areas, we must act accordingly. If we want to be the best in the world in analyzing frogs, you heard right, frogs, I need to use these very, very, very politically correct and hypothetical examples. Then it's very important that you do a good job in frogs. And then it might be that you are not so good at analyzing blueberries. So we need to focus. And if we want to be unique and bold, we need to be able to communicate what's unique or bold in us. If we want that Åbo Academy is an exciting place for students, spännande as it's called in Swedish, we must do our campus exciting. The university strategy, if it's prepared and written well, will direct us towards these goals we choose. And it's certainly, I would say, the most important document that the board of any university adopts. It really directs the work of the board, and it also directs the work of the operative leaders, deans, rectors, etc. So it's really important guidance when we stand in front of the difficult and important decisions. The final text is, of course, approved by the board, but the process as such is ours, and it's as important as the text as such. So we don't write it, the board doesn't write it for itself, it's for us, for everyone. And that's why your input is absolutely necessary, invaluable. We can't do it without you. So during the process that leads to the final document, towards the end of the year, we are going to offer several opportunities for you to tell us what you think. Use them, please. Be active. Carpe diem. This is academic event. You need to use some Latin as well. And as the chair of the working group that facilitates the process, I really promise, and this is a public promise, it's binding, I promise that we do our best in order to get your voices heard. We will walk around, we will listen, and my personal goal is that there's not anyone at this university about there before midsummer approximately, when we go to our cottages, there's no one who is not aware of the process. That's the goal. So follow our webpage, OA 2030, OA 2030. Of course, I'm a realist. I know that regardless my arguments, some of you think that, it's just another piece of paper. You also may think that it's something very instrumental. We do it only because the Ministry of Culture and Education requires that. That's of course true, they do require that. But dear friends, I've been around in the academia, not 40 years, but enough so that I don't really have any particular need to produce meaningful documents, and I don't want to be involved in meaningless processes. So I take this process very seriously, as does the working group and also the board, and I know also the Rector steering group takes this very seriously, so do that as well. It would be nice. Join us. So I strongly encourage you all to share your ideas with us. Think big, dream. There are plenty of opportunities to do these reality checks, so really try to think big. So, but finally, I would like to use this opportunity also to thank the Demos team, who, on behalf of the steering group for this impact project, you have actually managed to change our perceptions, which is very important, and your work has been impactful. We moved from a kind of very simple and linear understanding of impact, maybe, okay, we write these U4-3 articles and that's it, blah, blah, some patents. But I would say that we have now reached a very different understanding on impact, and we are very, very grateful for that. And special thanks to Mikael Sokero and Julia Jousilahti. It has been really nice to work with you. I really admire your professionalism and your good sense of humor. You pushed us also very hard, but we had fun. And I would like to, of course, also thank the panelists, Vice Rector William van der Akker and Research Impact Manager Rosemarie Barble, our good neighbor, Vice Rector Rita and Dr. Jaakko Horsemen. And thank you very much for your ideas. They are very valuable for us. We have small gifts somewhere. I got some instructions that they are here somewhere. While I'm searching, just give them applause once more.
So while this very necessary thing is happening, at this stage is time to end this session. So thank you all for coming, and thank you everybody who were following us online. The discussions will certainly continue from here onwards, so please have meaningful discussions and participate in this process, as Elina was saying. So now it's time for coffee. Thank you, and see you in the lobby.